Hello and welcome to another edition of Press Pass on GNAT-TV. I'm Andrew McKeever, the news director at GNAT-TV's News Project. It's a pleasure to have you with us today on Wednesday, December 6th. It's also a great pleasure today to be joined by two folks from Report for America, which is a national service program that places journalists into local newsrooms to report on undercovered issues in communities. And so we're very interested to hear more about Report for America, and delighted to have on Kim Kleman, who is the executive director of Report for America, and also Lexi Krupp, who covers science and health stories for Vermont Public. She joined Vermont Public in 2021 as a Report for America Corps member. So, Kim, Lexi, great to have you with us today. Thank you for being here.
I am happy to be here.
Thanks so much.
Well, I've heard a lot about Report for America over the years. Really interesting organization, and certainly one that touches on a lot of bases of things that I'm certainly interested in. We've all seen how newsrooms have had struggles with, not being able to retain as many reporters and news folks as might have been the case in the past, and of course. The whole way news is gathered is so different today than it was even 20 or so years ago. And we've also heard much about news deserts and things like that, and particularly small communities losing local newspapers or other local news outlets, which has, I think, a very significant range of consequences for a lot of those communities. And so, Kim, I guess I just thought perhaps I'll turn to you to help us get started here. I wondered if you could just sort of describe Report for America for us. I mean, what does it do, and how was it started?
So we are a nonprofit organization. We work with local newsrooms to help them fill news craters, so areas of coverage they know they need to be covering, but they just don't have the resources to be able to do it. And we also help them learn how to raise money and stabilize the business part of their operation. And to do that, we find them talented early career journalists like Lexi here, and we pay for part of their salary for 2 to 3 years. And at the same time, we give them, tools to fundraise and also to help their business operation. And our hope is that after 2 to 3 years with our help, they are able to hire their Report for America Corps member or otherwise increase the capacity in their newsroom. We've been doing this, we've been fielding reporters for about 6 years now. We've sent out and helped subsidize more than 600 reporters in every state of the nation, including Vermont, of course. We have helped newsrooms raise more than $21 million in local donations, and we've supported salaries to the tune of about $19 million. So that, in a nutshell, is what we're all about.
Wow, that's fascinating. Well, Lexi, how did you connect with the Report for America? You have a very interesting background, I must say. You didn't go immediately into journalism straight out of college or whatever, at least as far as I can tell. So what led you to Report for America?
Yeah, I had never really planned to be a journalist. I studied science in college, taught science for a couple years, and in large part because journalism seemed like not a very viable career path. But I think I had taken a couple creative writing classes where I had this amazing opportunity to interview people and just say, hey, I'm a journalist, will you answer my questions? And they were like, yes. And I thought, oh, what? This is amazing. So I guess the really cool thing about journalism is that it marries this search for truth, which is what science is all about, with trying to understand what matters to people and sharing that with the public, and you get to be creative. It's a really, really cool job. So, okay, I teaching for a little bit, went back to school, did a master's in science journalism, was an independent journalist for a couple years, worked in a tiny little town in northern Michigan at a public radio station, and then got the job at Vermont Public through RFA, Report for America, and moved to Vermont.
Wow, fascinating. Yeah, I have a career path that's somewhat similar to yours, or even more extreme. I didn't get into journalism until I was 50, and I also was a school teacher for a couple of years, and was in retail and a couple of other areas, and finally came back to something I thought about doing right when I left college, but didn't. But what I've always found fascinating about journalism, it's an opportunity to keep on learning new things about so many things. I mean, if you're someone who has sort of a restless curiosity about the world and about what's going on, and whether it's local or state or regional or international, whatever, it's just a great opportunity to kind of learn about things that you probably would never learn about any other way. Certainly, you wouldn't meet the people you would meet any other way.
Yeah. When I started out in journalism, I knew I wanted to be a journalist from the time I was 12 years old, and editor of my middle school newspaper. And when I was growing up, and in my early career days, there was a definite path for journalism, right? You started covering a lot of small towns, you went to a bigger, more established regional paper, then maybe you went to a national paper or international paper. The pipeline was established, and that's how you made a career in journalism. And now, you alluded to this, Andrew, with the market very different, so many newsrooms closing or consolidating. We find that early career journalists, there's no one way or a couple of established ways anymore. One of the things that Report for America is trying to do is kind of rebuild that pipeline. We're one of the biggest recruiters of early career journalists. And with our training and mentorship and other things that we offer, I'm really happy to, we just got this stat that 85% of the folks who graduate from Report for America, all these core members, are staying in journalism. So I think that's really important that pipeline grow, because we will always need journalists. And anyway, we have to make those careers happen.
Absolutely. Well, what sort of training is provided for people who indicate they want to be part of Report for America? Do they go through classes or tutorials, or how does it work?
So we choose core members who have some experience with journalism. So they're early career journalists. They might have had, a job or two, or they were rock stars right out of college, helped run the student paper, had some really good local news internships. Once they join Report for America, we provide more than 70 trainings and workshops a year. Everything from really good beat training, how do you cover the environment in, wherever you happen to be, but also just life skills. How do you handle stress in the newsroom? And how do you ace your annual performance review? That kind of thing. Every core member who wants one gets a mentor who is, some journalist from across the nation who has volunteered with our program, and can help our core members through whatever they need help with. And then there's the network effect. We currently have about 250 journalists in the program. So Lexi might be one of 40 journalists who are covering, the environment or sciencing the environment. And just getting them together, we think, is a great way to, share story ideas or problems or whatever else. So those are some of the ways that we provide our training.
Well, I wish I'd heard about you folks about 20 years ago. That would have been great. I would have solved a lot of headaches. Lexi, let me turn to you. What is your You sort of alluded to this in your first answer there, but is it your sense that journalism is seen as an attractive career option for folks in your age cohort? Do people think of it, oh wow, they probably don't think about it in terms of financial security, I don't imagine, but is it seen as something that's an important job and is certainly worth doing?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't, news is a really hard industry to be in right now, or media in general. I mean, I saw yesterday that CBC, Canadian Broadcasting Company, is laying off 600 people, not filling 200 open positions. Podcast industry has been especially hard hit this year. Layoffs at Spotify just announced this week, Pushkin, NPR, WNYC. So, economically, things are pretty rough. Just like we have a sort of broken business model, so I don't think anyone would see it as like an attractive career option just in terms of stability, but I think it's a pretty awesome job that has a big inherent appeal in terms of like holding institutions in power accountable, right? Like that is, I think, and uplifting, voices with less power. So that's like a noble goal, I think regardless of what generation you are in. And I think the main challenge is just being able to do that work in our current economy.
Absolutely.
I agree with Lexi. And I also think you hear people talking today about, the decline of local news as really being, an attack on democracy, or just, you hear those two concepts together. And I totally agree with that, saving democracy will involve reestablishing local news. Because we're starting to see data about what happens when there are all these news deserts, right? We know that, voting declines because nobody's covering these candidates. They don't know what's going on in their own community. Polarization increases when you're not learning about your neighbors, like it's us versus them. Right? We know that bond ratings in communities that don't have local news and reporters kind of minding the store, bond ratings decrease, which means that municipalities have to pay more to borrow money. So I think it's really interesting that this isn't just a matter of we have to do it because local news is noble. It is like this is at the heart of how we retain a stable and well-functioning democracy, because at the heart of that is an informed citizenry. And again, we're just seeing the devastation that can be created when people don't know what's going on.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. I feel the exact same way, that it's very troubling when, particularly newspapers that serve smaller communities, just are under so much financial pressure that they either close up shop completely or have to sharply curtail their coverage of what's going on, and then I guess people find other ways of getting their information. The reliability of which sometimes is, I think, in my opinion, questionable. But they seem to just say, well, if I saw it on Facebook, it must be true. I didn't mean anything negative about Facebook. I could talk about 5 other, social media outlets as well. But it is kind of, it makes you wonder where it's all going, I guess, in my opinion. If this process continues for another 5 or 10 years, where does that leave us?
Yeah, there are signs, because I'm an optimist, and we are seeing newsrooms that are changing their business models and reacting to the reality of today, right? So we try to. There is way too much need out there. We cannot help every local newsroom. But Report for America is trying to place bets on newsrooms that know where they want to go. They are willing to try to raise money and change their business model to react to the realities of today. And that we think with a little bit of help from organizations like Report for America, we can help get them on the right path or help work with them so that they become beacons in the local newsroom community and others can learn from them and how they did it and how other newsrooms could do it too. So you're right, it's going to take a long time, but I'm really optimistic because I see newsrooms that are changing themselves effectively to react to what's going on today.
Well, Lexi, let me turn to you. What drew you to Vermont Public? I mean, you were there in northern Michigan, the Upper Peninsula, I assume? Or...
Close by. I was
right, the thumb
pinky.
or whatever.
Yeah.
So when you heard about a possibility of coming to Vermont, I mean, what drew you to this corner of the country?
I had gone to college in New Hampshire, pretty close to the border.
Okay.
So I originally, my first job at Vermont Public was covering the Upper Valley, so Windsor and Orange counties. So I had, lived there as a student, which is different than other parts of your life, but had a couple good friends who were still there and felt like I knew those communities, or some of them. So I did feel like pretty well positioned to say, like, I know this place, I really like it, and, would love to go back. That really helped, having like a connection to the region. And Vermont is, I mean, we don't need to, say how much we love Vermont, but it's been really wonderful to live here, both as like a normal person and also as a journalist, and a journalist covering, science and health has been really fun. There's a big engagement with the natural world. People are really curious about the weather and wildlife and the landscape, so I love being trying to answer some of those questions. And health care is really interesting in the state. We have pretty old, demographics and a strained sort of system. So it's really interesting to look at sort of stories within that tension. So I feel very lucky to be here.
Well, I look back at the list of stories that you've covered and filed over the past several months, and it's a remarkable range of topics that you've reported on. I guess I just wondered, how do you go about looking for stories in the science field, broadly speaking? Like you say, it covers a wide range of things, from climate to health and maybe science in a laboratory or whatever. But how do you go about coming up with ideas for stories to pitch to your news director?
The $1 million question. It's a whole mix of things, right? Like sometimes we have a system for audience members to reach out and reach out with a question or a tip. So a lot of stories come that way. It's also like just talking to people, doing daily spots, we call them. You'll have a conversation about, last week we had a big snowstorm and a lot of people were caught unawares. And so I was just doing sort of like this daily coverage of, we had over 30,000 people without power. And one of the utility folks I spoke with was like, it'd be really interesting to speak with a meteorologist about why we're seeing more of these heavy snowstorms, because that's been a big change and like a big strain on utilities. So then, from there, I was like, that's a great question. And did a story that spun off that. So all sorts of things. Sometimes it comes from we have a news meeting every day, and someone was talking about how it's still really hard for to get kids COVID vaccines. And so, started looking into like, why is that? And what is the distribution process here? So a whole mix of things. I don't know, there's a million answers, yeah.
Yeah. There is a million answers to where the news stories comes from for sure. I wondered, Kim, when you find someone who is potentially a good candidate for a Report for America, how do you decide where they might get placed, or is that up to them to make that decision, or how does that whole process work?
Yeah, let me take you through. So, and this is like the perfect time to be talking about this, because tomorrow we're going to announce to the world the new host newsrooms that we've decided we're going to be working with in the coming cycle. So we post that information on our website. We're going to be working with around 50 new newsrooms and positions. The same day, so also tomorrow, we open up our core member application process. So everybody who wants to be a core member will see every open position we have, the exact beat that newsroom needs covered, as determined by those newsrooms, not Report for America. The skills that are required, we need somebody who speaks Spanish fluently, or who has a science background for this environmental position, or whatever the specific skill set need happens to be. And then these journalists apply to Report for America. We assess and grade every application. We Zoom interview all finalist candidates, and then we create slates of candidates for every open position we have. So we will give a newsroom for every position 3 to 5 candidates that we think are just super. And we get, oh my gosh, we get hundreds and hundreds of applications. Typically it's about, like, for every 10 applications we get, maybe one of those folks become a Report for America core member. But anyway, we give these slates of candidates to every newsroom for every position. And it's the newsroom who interviews those candidates and makes the final selection. The core members actually work for the newsroom, not for Report for America. Like, we don't assign stories or anything like that. We provide the support, but they work for the newsroom. So that's basically how it works.
So the news organization reaches out to you to see if you have possible candidates for an opening that they may have, I guess.
Yeah, so when we decide to partner with the newsroom, when we say, yes, you're going to be a host newsroom for Report for America, because they also have applied to us a little bit earlier in the cycle. Once we pick our host newsrooms, yes, that's the process. We will find them great reporters. They pick from among 5 great ones, and then that's the reporter who works for them.
Interesting. Yep. I wanted to kind of, pivot slightly from all of this to ask you both about your reactions to something that, it kind of is sort of emerged in the past year or so more forcefully than it had been. I'm talking about artificial intelligence here. And as we saw over Thanksgiving, there was a bit of an upheaval at OpenAI, which developed the ChatGPT program, and it seems like I've been reading a lot of stories lately about artificial intelligence. I've been kind of following it for a while anyway, but it seems like the churn is ongoing here, and I can't help but wonder, and we've actually talked about this subject a little bit on a couple of other of our previous shows, how artificial intelligence might impact journalism. I have to say, I've often thought, wow, back when I was a beat reporter at a local newspaper, it would have been great to come back to the office and say to my computer, write me a story about the select board meeting I just attended, and have it spit out 500 or 600 words about that, and I'd go home at a reasonable hour instead of, sometime early in the morning. But that's probably, there's a lot of downsides to that as well. But anyway, I just wondered, Lexi, what you think about that?
Okay, so Andrew, you sent us this question ahead of time. So I posed your question to Chat GPT. Because I was curious what it would say. And I was like, I don't know that much about these, natural language processing AI. And it was a fun excuse to play around with it. But I think this sort of thing, like even just in seeing that answer, it can be a really useful tool that I've already actually heard incorporated in really interesting ways in some NPR pieces or other podcasts. So like that in particular, I think it's totally unethical to ever use that copy paste situation and put it in a story. But I think that if instead we're thinking about this type of natural language processing AI as a tool, it can be pretty cool. And I mean, AI is like a huge bucket, right? From ChatGPT, I learned it's also behind personalized content delivery, this idea of using algorithms to serve up news stories that are based on your attitudes and behaviors, and that's already a huge part of advertising, right? So I think the idea of AI being incorporated into how some news content is already appearing on some of these bigger platforms, that's already happening. So I think, it can certainly be scary, but I don't think it has to be.
That's funny. I popped the question into Bard, right? Google's AI platform, and kind of a similar response. I would say that there is potential for great good, but potential for evil. No, I have some friends who are editors who have been noodling around with AI by take this 3,000 word article and turn it into a 250 word thing. I mean, just to see how well it edited and or what were some of the problems. We are very interested in this at Report for America, to the point that we are going to be having a pilot beginning next year, working with some of our newsrooms to figure out what they want to know about AI and how could it be used on their business side, or what are the possibilities on the editorial side. And we know that some of our newsroom partners are already dipping their toe in and seeing how it might be used. So I think this is an excellent question, because I think we need to come up with answers, and we hope to be doing that next year.
Wow, very good. Yeah, no, it's a fascinating situation. I spent the last year trying to wrap my head around it all to say, okay, is this a dystopian 1984 future that was written about, or are we really going to solve a lot of long-term problems that have been defying solution? Well, we're going to have to leave it there for today. Unfortunately, this is quite interesting, and thank you both for making the time for this conversation. I really appreciate that. Kim Kleman, the Executive Director of Report for America, Lexi Krupp, Science Reporter for Vermont Public. Thank you both, and happy holidays.
Thank you so
Happy
much.
holidays. Thank you.
And thanks to all of you who've been with us. Hope you found our program interesting. We'll see you again the next time. Take care.